All right. Thank you everyone for joining me today for the second study abroad pre-departure orientation session. Today we have a little bit more of kind of the specific travel planning kinds of information that we're going to talk about. Here's an overview of our topics, a little bit of academic reminders, just things stemming from the last time that I was talking at the first session. I'm also going to talk about travel planning, money and communication, health, safety and responsibility, and then some next step pieces. So just a couple of reminders related to academics. I will be sending out permits this week that will include instructions on how to register for the University 492. So just watch your email, and once you receive that and your registration window has opened, go ahead and register. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact me, but it should be pretty straightforward if you just follow the instructions in the email. All right, so travel planning. So one question that people ask a lot is, when should I purchase my airline ticket? Strictly speaking, kind of historically, the research has shown that generally anywhere between 30 days and 90 days in advance is usually kind of the sweet spot for the prices. 60 days in advance on average is usually kind of where the best prices often are. If you buy an airline ticket too early, often the prices tend to be a bit higher just because they know that you're planning on traveling. And then once you get within the 60-day window before you would fly, the 30-day window, the 14-day window, the 7-day window, the 3-day window, and the 1-day window, the prices just keep going up. Things right now, though, honestly, are a little bit up in the air. You may find that prices are significantly less expensive than they would be in a normal time frame. So definitely do start taking a look and seeing if there are tickets that you want to jump on. It used to be that it was a pretty significant investment to go ahead and purchase it because there used to be pretty significant change fees on most airline tickets, where if you're going to change your airline ticket, you're going to have to pay the change fee plus any difference in fare. And the change fees often were something like $250 or $350. Right now, though, because of kind of the travel limitations due to COVID, a lot of the major airlines have been removing change fees in order to encourage people to purchase airline tickets. Of course, if you do purchase an airline ticket, you are making a commitment to travel at some point. It's just that you can adjust the dates of when you would travel and potentially your itinerary. But it does make it a little bit easier to go ahead and potentially purchase an airline ticket, especially if you see a really good deal, knowing that if you do need to make adjustments to the dates of your travel, that you can do that with hopefully minimal cost, assuming the price of the ticket doesn't change significantly. Another thing that sometimes people will ask me, especially if they're looking at a year-long program or if they're looking at a return that's more than about 9 months out, is whether to do one round-trip ticket or to do two one-way tickets. Most of the time, it's much less expensive to do one round trip ticket versus two one-way tickets. There's just a discount that's built into a round trip ticket, versus the two one-way tickets are usually more than 50% of the cost of a round trip. But every once in a while, people will find a really good deal, and will go ahead and purchase two one-way tickets, and end up making good savings that way. So the best thing to do is just to look at different options and kind of, maybe make a spreadsheet or write down some of the prices that you're finding and just start tracking that out and seeing what you're getting the best deal on for when and where you need to travel. And then also just to let you know, we do have some helpful links on our website under the travel planning section. In a section labeled travel resources. You can go ahead and take a look on there, and there's links to different airlines, to different organizations, trains, all sorts of different types of resources that are helpful when you're traveling. All right, so packing. There's a couple of things to think about. The biggest things are the weight and the size of your suitcase. With the airline tickets, there's usually a specific limitation on the weight that you're able to carry. It's both a limitation on the suitcases that you're going to check, and then also there may or may not be a specific limit that's set by the airlines for the carry-on baggage that you have. Though the bins themselves often have a limit of how much in total they're supposed to be able to carry. When you're looking at the size of a suitcase, they're usually, the size limitations by the airlines are usually listed in terms of linear inches, meaning that's one measurement of the width of the suitcase, one measurement of the height, and one measurement of the depth of the suitcase. So if you just measure one measurement in each of the three dimensions of the suitcase and then add that together, that'll give you the linear inches measurement. Generally, when you are packing, most international airlines, it's somewhere around 50 pounds that you have for your check suitcase, and it might be somewhere in the 30 pounds-ish or 15 pounds-ish, depending, for carry-on suitcases. You usually have an allowance of either one or a little more rare, two suitcases that you can check with your airline ticket. And then also for bringing onto the plane, you usually have one carry-on suitcase and one personal item. And the carry-on suitcase is a suitcase that you can put in the overhead bin. And the personal item is usually something like a backpack, a messenger bag, um, a computer laptop bag or something like that, a purse. But the personal item has to be something that can fit under the seat in front of you. So it tends to be a much smaller item. In terms of things to make sure that you bring in your carry-on, if you have any types of medical supplies, it's good to bring a photocopy of your passport, the front and back of your credit cards. The big important thing on the credit card part is making sure that you have the phone number for your credit card. So if it happens to be lost or stolen, that you have the contact information to be able to let the credit card company know that so that they can cancel the number and make it no longer work. And then if you do have any valuables, first, I'll just say if you have anything that's just utterly irreplaceable, you know, like the ring that you inherited from your grandmother or something like that, maybe think about whether you want to bring that along with you or not. You know, just something that's really completely irreplaceable. It's really easy to kind of lose or misplace or possibly have stolen something when you're traveling. And I would just feel really bad if something happened to something that was important to you and you weren't able to replace it. For valuables like electronics or you know, headphones or something like that, just make sure with those that you bring them in your carry-on suitcase, just because you'll be able to hand carry those, and not only make sure that you are keeping a closer eye on them, they're not going through kind of unknown handling somewhere away from your line of sight, but also you know that you're taking care of them a little bit more carefully in terms of carrying them, and they're not being thrown someplace and your suitcase isn't going down some sort of conveyor belt and hitting the end and stuff like that. So put those in your carry-on suitcase or your personal item, and you'll be able to make sure that they arrive safely at the other end. And then another thing to know, if you are bringing some sort of electronic devices, laptops, cell phones, iPads, watch, any of those types of things that you normally would recharge. There are two things to think about in terms of conversion. One is the plug may be different in the country that you're going to. So instead of being shaped like our two-prong or our three-prong plugs, they may be prongs that are like this, or two circles or something like that. You can buy a converter for that really easy, you know, on Amazon or at Target or pretty much anywhere that has travel supplies, where it'll just convert from the two-prong or the three-prong to whatever that local plug is. And you can buy those as sets too, so that you would just have one kind of cube that might have different plug converters in it. The other thing to think about is the electricity itself. You know, we're on a 110 in the US. In other countries, especially a lot of Europe, they're on a 220 system, meaning that they have a higher voltage than we do in the US. So if you were to bring something like a hair dryer and then just plug it directly into the wall there, it would actually burn out the hair dryer because the voltage is so much higher than what we have here. There are electrical converters that you can purchase, but those tend to be pretty expensive, really heavy, and they don't work really well. The good news is that for things like laptops and cell phones and basically all of your kind of higher end electronics, if you take a look at the plug, the block that you have in the cord, it'll say on there the range of voltage that it'll operate on, and most of them operate between 100 and 220. So those types of devices, you shouldn't have any problem with just taking along and then using the plug converter and then the electricity voltage that comes out of the wall. Do double check that. Just make sure that you understand and that you've made sure that they're set up that way, but pretty much all of them are at this point. It's things like hair dryers, alarm clocks, hair straighteners, any of the kind of smaller electronic devices. Most of those are not set up to work on different voltages. And so if you are thinking that you need something like that, it may actually be easier to just purchase it when you get there. So just plan to go out and purchase a hair dryer that you're going to use for the time that you're in country that's already set up to work on the particular voltage that they have in that country. Yeah, so any questions? The IT at NDSU actually can help with looking at the plug voltage as well, or feel free to email me and just send me a photo of the information that's on the block, and I can help take a look as well. All right, so in terms of planning for arriving at the airport, there are a few different steps, and it is a little bit different depending on if you're in the US or if you're in another country. Generally speaking, when you get to the airport, there is a first section where you check in, you go up to the desk or to some sort of electronic kiosk. When you're traveling internationally, they usually need to see your passport at that point because they want to double check and make sure that you're going to be eligible to enter the country. And that's why you, of course, want to make sure that if you do need to have a visa in order to enter the country, that you've followed all of those requirements. And I did talk about that a bit in the first pre-departure session. And then once they've done that, they will take your checked suitcase at that point, throw it on a conveyor belt, and then you would continue on with your carry-on suitcase up to airport security. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but they screen and make sure that you're not bringing anything onto the plane that you're not allowed to have. Once you've gone through airport security, then you wait by the gates. Eventually you get onto the plane. The plane flies you to another country or another city in the US and then to another country. And once you arrive, you are routed off the plane and you generally wait in some sort of long line until you get to a booth with some sort of immigration official there who will again take a look at your passport and verify that you're able to enter the country, whether it's just for transiting to another plane to go on to another location or whether it's your final destination. And then if applicable, they may be stamping something in your passport just to say that you've been screened and approved. Some sort of entrance stamp on there. And then after you've gone through the immigration process, then generally you are routed to another area that looks like a baggage claim where you would wait and pick up your checked suitcase. There may be a form that you may be instructed to fill out for customs to indicate if there is anything that you're bringing into the country that's a little bit more unusual or that you need to declare for any of their procedures. And then you usually go through another area where you have customs officials who are just double checking that you're not bringing in anything that you're not supposed to. If you are at your final destination, then at that point you can leave the airport, go get picked up, or however that works. If you're not at your final destination, then there's often a direction that you can go where you can go ahead and recheck your bag. In the US, if you happen to be going through this process, then you do usually have to go through airport security again, just to make sure, again, that you're not bringing anything in that you're not allowed to have on a plane. In other countries, they may or may not require you to go through airport security. Most commonly, I haven't had to do that, but there are a few countries that you'll run into needing to do that. And then you just keep following that loop until you arrive at your final destination and leave the airport. All right, so as I mentioned, at some point you will be going through airport security. One really important thing as you are in the airport at any given point, be sure not to leave your bags unattended. So you do have to take them with you to the bathroom, or if you go to buy a drink or something like that, always take your bags with you. and be really careful not to, accidentally leave them places or things like that, especially when you're jet lagged. It's really important if somebody were to come up to you and ask you to carry something with you, do not take those things. It would usually be drugs or something illegal, and it could get you into huge legal trouble. So absolutely do not carry things for other people that you do not know. And there is something called the 311 regulations. Those are specifically related to liquids that would be in your carry-on suitcase. So in your checked bag, there are no restrictions on liquids. If you somehow manage to fill your entire suitcase with a huge bag of liquid that just somehow managed to stay under the 50-pound limit, you could do that with your checked suitcase. But with your carry-on items, you are much more limited in terms of the liquids that you can bring on board with you. The limitation, the 311 term, is that you can have one quart-sized baggie, and inside of that, all of your liquids have to be in bottles or containers that are 3 ounces or less. It's actually 3.4 ounces or less. And so you can put as many little bottles in that one quart-sized baggie as you want, but they all have to be in those smaller sizes. And it is a measurement of the maximum size of what that is. So even if you have say, gel toothpaste that needs to go in the bag, if normally the toothpaste is 5 ounces, but you only have 3 ounces left, you can't put that in the bag. You have to have something that the maximum size of it is 3 ounces, so they make sure that you are staying within that. Oftentimes that means that if you do have any liquids or gels that you are wanting to bring on, you usually have to buy little bottles that fit those measurements, and put those in, put the liquids into the bottles to make sure that you're following those requirements. There are some kind of interesting exceptions to the 311 regulations. So I'll send out this as a PDF, and you'll be able to click on the link to take a look if you have any questions about that. Things like breast milk are exempted from the 311. Also, I think it's either 1 or 2 snow globes that you can bring on that are exempted from that. So, just take a look if you have any questions, and you can see the list of what is allowed and what is subject to those limitations. And then the other thing is when you arrive in the country, as I mentioned, you'll go through customs, and different countries have different limitations about the things that you can bring into the country. Some of the common things for the US that you're not allowed to bring in include meat, produce, so fruits and vegetables, sand, officially you're not supposed to bring in. And the reason for those types of limitations is generally related to invasive species. So they want to make sure that you're not bringing in some sort of plant or animal or insect or something like that that might come into a local ecosystem and then become invasive and cause a lot of problems for that. So if you do have anything that's kind of in that category, make sure that you check before you travel and that you don't bring anything that you're not allowed to. And that does weirdly include things like, for example, if you're on a plane and they give you an apple, you're generally not allowed to take the apple off the plane and then into the country that you're going to. It would need to be discarded rather than being able to carry it with you. But again, take a look at the information for the country that you're going to, and you can find out what limitations would apply for where you're planning to travel. All right, so flights. One little thing that can be helpful in terms of just being prepared in case of any unexpected delays and things like that is that when you do receive your final itinerary, make sure to pass it along to whoever is meeting you at the airport or picking you up, and give them the full information on the full itinerary. So not just the final flight that you'll be arriving on, but the itinerary starting from when you depart. The reason why that's helpful is because if you do have any sorts of delays that are in the earlier flights, those can impact the later flights in terms of you potentially being moved to a different flight or rebooked on something. And if the person who's picking you up only has that final flight information and you just don't show up on that plane, it can be really hard for them to try to track down what might have happened. Versus if they have that earlier information, then they're able to look back and see, oh, this thing happened earlier where there was a delay, so this person is probably going to be on a different flight. And then of course, have their contact information, whether it's a phone number or email address or some way of messaging them over WhatsApp or something like that, so that you can contact them as soon as possible once you have service or internet access or something like that, to let them know of any changes that might be happening. All right, so I don't know if any of you have experienced the joy that is jet lag, but it can be a bit of a doozy. So just kind of know to expect it and give yourself some extra time. Jet lag is something that's caused by doing high-speed travel across time zones, and you really, really notice it when you're traveling internationally, especially if you might be 7 hours different or 12 hours different from what you are normally used to. Usually jet lag really manifests in terms of you either wanting to be asleep at times that you're not supposed to be asleep, or your body wanting to be awake at times when you would really prefer to be sleeping. Personally, I do find that it is, for whatever reason, a little bit easier for me to fly to Asia versus when I come back to the US. My jet lag is really bad. And then the reverse, when I go to Europe, it's usually a little bit more difficult when I first arrive, and when I come back, it's a little bit easier. I have a feeling it has to do with the international dateline, but not everyone's the same, and you might have a very different experience with that. Some of the other signs besides just sleepiness or wakeness include fatigue as kind of just a general all over body thing. You may at some point find that you are just going to be asleep, like you don't really have the choice to stay awake anymore. You have insomnia, of course, being awake, and then irritability, because of course when you're tired and groggy and things are being frustrating, it's a little bit harder to have a cheery mood about things that might be a little different or a little frustrating. Some of the things to work around with that, be sure to drink lots of water, and that includes on the plane while you're traveling. I know nobody wants to use the tiny, kind of awkward little airplane bathroom, but be sure every time a flight attendant walks around and offers beverages, take the beverages, drink the beverages, because it will really make a difference in terms of helping you to recover from the jet lag, and then also helping to avoid you getting sick from all of kind of the travel stresses when you arrive. It's also helpful to do some stretches and some exercises. When you get up to use the bathroom, for example, there's usually a little bit of an open area by where the bathrooms are on these big planes. That's a good spot to do some stretches. Maybe, stretch out your elbows a bit, stretch up your arms, all sorts of things like that. It's also really good when you first arrive to try to stay up to a time that is somewhat similar to when you might go to bed. Sometimes, I'll be honest, it is absolutely miserable to do that on the first day. I've had a few days where I forced myself to stay up until something like only 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. And it was just utterly miserable to do that, where I was having to go on long walks and, do things that I was physically moving so that I wouldn't fall asleep earlier. But it does make a huge difference in terms of how quickly you will adapt to the new time zone. If you go to bed really early or think that you're just going to take a nap, oftentimes you will sleep much longer than you expect and then end up waking up in the middle of the night there, and then it'll just take so much longer to try to adjust your sleep schedule to get on that new time zone. Versus if you stay up to kind of that normal-ish time, then you're just that much closer to adjusting to what it actually is in that local time zone. It can be helpful, even a few days before you're going to travel, to try to adjust your sleep schedule a little bit. Maybe go to bed a little bit early or a little bit late, depending on what the time difference is going to be. But then again, try to stay up as much as you can to get on that new schedule. And then, as kind of a general rule of thumb, you can think about expecting roughly per hour of difference 1 day to adjust. So if you're going someplace that is 12 hours difference, it may take up to 12 days for you to get fully acclimated to that new time zone. So give yourself some kindness, some extra sleep, some rest, and things like that, and you will get through jet lag. All right, so money and communication. So a few things about money. The first thing is that I do recommend doing some sort of budget. It doesn't have to be anything super detailed or super specific in terms of a budget, but if you do have an idea of how much money you're going to have for spending money and meals and stuff like that, it may be helpful just to take that total amount and then average that out over the number of days that you're going to be abroad and over the number of weeks that you're going to be abroad. And that'll give you an idea of kind of how much money you have per day or per week to be spending. And then while you're abroad, then you can keep an eye out for if you're spending more than that, just know that that's coming out of future days that you would potentially be wanting to spend money, and that at the end you may end up running a little bit short if you continue spending that exact same way, versus maybe taking a little bit easy for another couple of days or a couple of weeks to kind of get back in balance with that. Generally, when you're traveling, it's really common for people to use credit cards, debit cards, and cash in the local currency to be able to purchase things. Most of the places that you would go in the world, US credit cards are accepted. It's really helpful now that all of our cards have the chips in them because most places in the world use the chips. One thing that is a little bit different though, especially if you're going to a place in Europe, is that in the US, our credit cards are all set up to be chip and signature, meaning that they have a chip in it, but then generally the authentication is done through a signature process. In places like Europe, a lot of them are chip and PIN, meaning that people punch in a code to authorize the use of the card. What you may find with that is that if you're in, say, a restaurant in Paris, and they bring a little machine around to your table to swipe or to dip, I guess, the card in, you may find that the waiter or waitress is a little bit surprised to find that rather than you punching in a number, that is actually prompting them to print out a receipt so that you can sign it. And sometimes people do actually find that because it's so unusual for a card to be a chip and signature, that the restaurants may not even have a pen for people to sign. So feel free to carry a pen and be prepared for those types of scenarios. You might also find circumstances, say a train station or something like that, where there may be machines that are really only set up to work for a chip and pin type of card. Oftentimes there's some sort of backup window where there's an attendant or something like that that you can go to in order to in order to have it run manually and use your card. But if you are going to be traveling during a time where maybe one of those windows wouldn't be open, it might be useful to carry a little bit of cash in case you might need to have that backup because your card isn't the right type that the machine is set up for. In terms of backup cash just in general, there's a couple of different tips. One, usually people don't need to bring a lot of cash with them. You can usually access cash, even take it out at the airport when you first arrive. There's usually international ATMs in the airport. If you do want to bring a little bit of local currency, you probably can. Some banks, I know like Wells Fargo, for example, you can order currency before you travel, and they don't have a large fee for that, but it does depend on whether they have access to the currency, and that partially depends on whether somebody has traveled to that country recently and has brought that currency back, that a bank might have the access to it. Oftentimes, a local bank maybe would need to order currency from a central bank. So if you are planning on doing that, you'll want to make sure to give them some time to do that, and it might take a couple of weeks for that currency to arrive. And you can ask your bank what the cost would be for it. Another option is to just bring a little bit of US currency with you, so that when you're at the airport, when you arrive, if you needed to, you could potentially change it into the local currency. Honestly, most of the time an ATM is going to give you a much better exchange rate than going to one of the exchange counters where there's a person that would be doing the changeover. So if you have the option to take the cash out using an ATM card, you're probably going to get a much better deal. But you could bring some US currency just as a backup to be able to do that. And then if everything goes fine with the ATM, just hold on to the US currency and potentially spend it when you get back to the US instead. A couple of things to do in prep before you go, though, for sure. If you are bringing a credit card or an ATM card, be sure to call both your bank and the credit card company to let them know that you will be traveling and where you'll be traveling to and the dates that you'll be traveling. They will put a note on the card to make sure that their fraud department doesn't turn off the card when suddenly there are purchases showing up from South Korea. Also, that will be the point at which the bank and the credit card company will let you know if there are any special fees that you need to expect. Oftentimes with ATM cards, the way the fees are set up is on a per use basis, meaning that you might have a fixed set specific amount that you would be paying. Again, I bank with Wells Fargo, so with mine, it's the same $5 fee if I were to use the ATM in the Memorial Union as it would be if I were to use my card in Tokyo, Japan. Other banks, it might be a different fee internationally, or I know there are some banks that don't even charge fees or even refund the fees that a local ATM in another country might be charging you. So definitely ask when you are calling your bank and they can give you information about that. Credit cards, on the other hand, their fees are often based around a percentage of the charge that you do. So the more that you spend, the more the fee might be on that. But again, there are some credit cards out there that don't charge international fees. And I happen to have a Capital One card for just that reason. They don't charge international transaction fees. But there are many of them out there. So if you are planning on using a credit card a lot, you may want to look into whether there are any credit cards out there that are a good fit for your needs that don't charge for that. And then sometimes people do open bank accounts abroad. Honestly, it's usually only in cases where it's required for, say, paying rent for an apartment or something like that. And usually the program or the school will help with that process, help people to go ahead and set that up and let you know what to bring in things. Otherwise, it's a little bit of a headache to do that. So it's usually not worth the effort to set that up for just being there for a semester or a year. In terms of some other tips, if you are going to be gone during a tax season or sometime where there might be some major financial um, uh, things going on, it might be worth having a power of attorney set up, meaning designating somebody else to be able to do financial transactions on your behalf. There are forms at banks usually for giving people access to kind of that financial authorization for you, or that's something that you can do with a lawyer. If you do have a regular payment that you make with a paper check, you can potentially leave signed checks with a trusted family member or someone like that that they can go ahead and pay that for you. You can potentially add somebody to your checking or your savings account, like a family member, so that they can keep an eye on your balance or transfer money in or something like that. One heads up on that though, some banks will not let you take somebody off of a bank account. They make you close the account and then open up a new account. So if you do have a lot of automatic payments set up, just be aware if you were going to add somebody on there and um, of that hiccup that might come up down the road. And you can ask your bank if that would be something that they would require. And then, of course, online banking is pretty fantastic. You can keep an eye on where your finances are, see what exchange rates you're getting after you have taken money out of an exchange, out of an ATM and stuff like that. And just use it in general to pay bills and all sorts of things, even while you're abroad. Do be aware that some online banking may be set up where you need the secondary authorization. So make sure that if you do have that set up, that you're going to be able to have access to your two-factor piece. Especially think about if you normally receive a text message and you won't have your same phone number when you're abroad. Is there another way that you can set up that two-factor authentication in order to be able to access those codes while you're traveling, maybe over Wi-Fi or something like that? And here's an image that I had taken at an ATM in Japan. There's two things on here. Um, one, this little plus symbol here, and then over here, this little Cirrus symbol. Those are the really common symbols that you might find on the back of an ATM or credit card that is issued in the US. That means that your card should be accessible abroad. So take a look at your credit card and your ATM card and just double check that it has one or the other of those types of symbols. And usually that means that you should be able to use them most anywhere where you would be traveling. It is really common with that you might find both on there, the Cirrus and the Plus, or you might only find one or the other. The other thing too, I guess, to point out is that credit cards often will give you an option to do cash advance on them, meaning take cash out like it's an ATM card. And that can be a really good fallback if you do have a case where maybe your ATM card isn't working or it gets locked for supposed fraud or something like that. But just to be aware that when you do that, the financial charges on a cash advance are usually much higher than the charges that you would pay for just like a regular card swipe. So again, when you're calling your credit card company, maybe ask them what the fees are for doing a cash advance, just so you know that in case you end up having to do that at some point. All right, so communication. The big thing to think about in terms of cell phones is to really think about the purposes that you have for communicating with your cell phone, who you're going to talk to, and kind of what the circumstances are for it. And I'd really encourage you to think about maybe separating it out in terms of thinking about where you might be talking to people in the US from the foreign country and where you might be talking to people locally in the foreign country, and doing those as two separate forms of communication, just because that can really save you a lot of cost depending on the options that you have in the country. So for example, there's kind of maybe three different ways that you can set up a cell phone when you're traveling. The first that is pretty common when people travel for short periods of time is to have your US cell phone plan activate an international kind of roaming option on there. Usually it's okay for short periods of travel, but if you are planning on being gone for more than maybe a week or 2 weeks, that can often get to be really expensive. Going for, multiple weeks during the summer or going for a semester or a year, it's usually not the best option to do that. The second option is that you can potentially put your US-based plan on hold, and often they will still hold your phone number and everything like that. They just wouldn't be charging you the regular fee for it, and instead get a SIM card that you would purchase locally, or you can sometimes pre-purchase it depending on where you're going, where you would have a cell phone number that is in that local country. And it's often a card that you actually have to physically put in the phone, though there are some virtual SIM cards now that are available for some models of phone. If you were to do that, one key thing is just to double check, first of all, that the phone that you have is a global phone, meaning that it usually needs to have a GSM bandwidth that matches the bandwidth that's used in the country that you're going to. Most smartphones these days fit into that, but just double check and make sure if you're not certain that it is going to be. And usually your cell phone carrier can let you know. Also, in order to do that, your phone does have to be unlocked. Historically speaking, a lot of times phones used to be locked to specific carriers, and then the carrier like Verizon or AT&T or whoever, they had to unlock the phone in order for it to be able to be used with somebody else's network. A lot of the phones today are not necessarily locked when you buy them. I know Verizon, for example, when you purchase a phone through them, it isn't locked by default. Some of the other carriers, though, still do lock their phones, but they can unlock them upon request, potentially. They may have certain guidelines around that, such as you maybe need to have paid off your phone or something like that before they'll do it. But you can call them and ask them what the guidelines would be for unlocking it. And then once it's unlocked, then it really is just a matter of buying that SIM card under whatever the conditions are for purchasing it in the local country, and then putting that in. Sometimes that means getting some sort of local phone plan where you pay just like you would in the US, month to month. Sometimes you're able to purchase a SIM card that is a prepaid account where you can just go on and add more money that credit towards the cost of the usage that you have or something like that. And then if you have that local SIM card, then again, you have that local number, and you would be using the local charges in terms of talking to other people that might be in the country with you. So that's usually pretty affordable. And then the third option is that you could potentially basically turn off your service in the US and then not activate your particular phone when you're traveling, but just use it as something that can connect over Wi-Fi to connect to the internet, and then to purchase some sort of local phone to use instead. And usually with that, it would be a cheap phone or a dumb phone or something that's not very expensive that would have a SIM card in it and some sort of local phone number that you would be using. So you'd be carrying two devices at that point. And that just depends on the country that you're going to and kind of what you're expecting to do for your usage. And then with all of those scenarios, also think then, of course, about how you're going to communicate with people back in the US. This is a really great way where looking at connecting with people over the internet is fantastic. So things like Skype, FaceTime, Zoom, as we are also used to using these days. You can use all of those same types of things over Wi-Fi. It also might be helpful to know if you have an iPhone where the people that you talk to normally are the blue bubbles. That is going through Apple's servers. So you can still continue to use that on Wi-Fi even if you don't have a phone that's activated. As long as it can connect to the internet, you can still continue to connect that way. But the people that you might talk to that are on the green bubbles, those are ones that are going through actual text messages as opposed to the iMessage system through Apple's servers. Other apps out there, of course, KakaoTalk, WhatsApp, Snapchat, Facebook, Discord, Slack, all of those different types of things that you can use to connect with people, which I'm sure I'm speaking to all of the experts who already know this stuff, but just think about who you might be communicating with and the best methods for continuing that. Regular mail, of course. Don't forget how lovely it is to get packages. It's really fun to send postcards and potentially see your own postcards that you sent when you get back. Stick them in your, steal them from somebody, stick them in your memory book, your photo album down the road. It's also really nice to, let friends and family know if there are things that you're missing, like certain types of candy or snacks or things like that, where they can send you packages in the mail. And those can be really kind of heartwarming things to potentially get at some point if you're missing home a bit. And email, of course. And then just a note on social media. Of course, it's fantastic that we have the opportunity to really share our experiences and to keep in touch, even when we are far away and, on the other side of the globe. But also it can be a little bit easy to spend more time than we intend on social media, especially if you're feeling a little bit homesick. And unfortunately, sometimes when you spend a lot of time online and a lot of times connecting with people back home, that can only make the homesickness worse, just because it's reminding you of the things that you're missing, and it's kind of taking away from the time that you have to get out and to experience the new culture and to find those new, fun, exciting things there. So as you are going abroad, I really encourage you to think about, why you're going abroad, what are you hoping to get out of it, what are kind of your goals, and to really kind of preemptively set a little bit of limits for yourself on the amount of time that you want to spend on social media. Of course, spend that time that you have planned, connect, post photos, all of those sorts of things. But maybe, if you are out and about, you're doing something, try to be present in the moment of where you are rather than having it filter through kind of your anticipation or, even currently being on some sort of social media or streaming or any of those types of things. Because again, it can kind of create this barrier between you and the experience that you're trying to have. So make the most of your time abroad, and you'll always be able to share more about the experiences that you had when you get back as well. Oh, and one last note, if you are uploading photos and things like that, do double check and make sure that whatever platform you're uploading them to, whether they resize the photos or not. I know people don't use Facebook as much these days, but one of the issues that I know people have had in the past is that when they have uploaded photos to Facebook, they've actually deleted the copy of the photos that they had on the camera or on their computer to make space. And unfortunately, the photos that Facebook saves, they downsize them. So those photos were really, really small when they went to go ahead and try to save them again. So, don't count necessarily on your social media as a good way to save the photos for the future. Save the originals on your camera or your card or some sort of backup method, so that you'll have access to those in the future too. All right, and then one other thing, I had already mentioned multi-factor authentication in terms of your bank account and stuff like that. Also be aware, of course, that NDSU now has switched to requiring multi-factor authentication for Campus Connection, which I don't expect you to spend a whole bunch of time in Campus Connection when you're studying abroad, but you probably will need to get in there in order to register, or maybe to check on a balance, or something like that. So if you haven't already, make sure that you have the Duo app set up on a device, whether that's your phone or an iPad or something like that, something that can connect to a Wi-Fi system. And that does not require a cell phone service, so that it's not just set up to send you text messages, that it actually goes through that app. And also be sure to create offline passcodes, where you can have kind of a backup for that. There's more information on the NDSU ITS website about this, but just make sure that you are thinking ahead a little bit, so that if you do need to get into Campus Connection, you don't have that multi-factor authentication end up becoming a headache for you while you're traveling. Okay, and then one other thing about communication. I know email is not fun, and especially when you're traveling and there's a bunch of kind of spam emails that come through. However, I do have to let you know that your NDSU email account is your official means of communication, and that you are required to continue checking it. What I recommend, honestly, is to go ahead and set up rules on your email, so you can actually have things like the student listserv and various generic kind of emails that you might get. You can set those up to filter into a specific folder, so that you don't have to constantly read those all the time, and then you can just focus on the emails that are actually specifically sent to you. And then, if you want, you can go through that folder and clean it up at some point. Otherwise, just in general, please do check your email at absolute minimum. Check it at least once a week, preferably every couple of days, or maybe once a day. You can set that up on your phone and just kind of go through and delete things. It seems like every semester there's at least one student who maybe runs into an issue where they missed signing something for their financial aid, or loans or something like that, and then they're not receiving emails to get reminders about it, and then suddenly they don't have the money that they were expecting to have, and it becomes a bit of a panic. Or if there are any circumstances where there's some sort of dangerous thing that happens, or an earthquake, or who knows what, we'll usually use email as our kind of first means of reaching out, just to check in and make sure you're safe and stuff like that. So please just keep checking your email just to make sure you don't miss anything that is important. And then last, communication piece, parents. So please be sure to communicate with your parents or guardians, both before you go and while you're abroad. Let them know why you want to go. You can definitely impress them with all of the thought that you've put into why you've decided to do this, and all of the work that you've put in, and how much you know about kind of the planning, the costs, and the travel, and all of those pieces, what you're hoping to get out of it. If you are in that type of relationship where you're comfortable doing, please share your travel itinerary. Again, this is a good spot to share the full itinerary. Also, think about setting expectations appropriately. I know a lot of parents want you to tell them immediately when you arrive in the country. Sometimes the logistics of that end up being a little bit more complicated than you expect, where maybe you'll get there and your cell phone doesn't connect the way that it's supposed to, or your phone is just out of battery, or you're just really tired, or you get sick right away, and you end up crashing. going to bed really quickly when you arrive. And if you tell your parents, I will contact you within 24 hours of arriving, then if you arrive and everything goes smoothly and you let them know immediately, then you are exceeding their expectations and everything is great. But if you tell them you're going to contact them immediately when you arrive and then something comes up and you're not able to, that can cause a little bit of a panic. So maybe tell them you'll contact them within 24 hours or even within 48 hours. I will be honest, when I went abroad, I think I forgot to tell my parents that I had arrived safely for something like 3 days because I was just so busy and so excited about the stuff that I was doing. And luckily, they had the patience of saints and did not freak out on me. But I would not expect that from any other parent. So, just let them know a reasonable time frame and then remember to follow up with them about that. And then the other thing is that as you're getting ready to go, your parents may have some really excellent ideas and questions and things like that about things that you should be asking or issues that might be coming up. It's really important, though, that you are the one that is in contact with our office because we really view this as opportunity for you to grow and learn and become a confident traveler in your own right. So if we do have a parent that contacts us directly, generally what we'll do is we will actually send the response to you with a note on it that just says, feel free to forward this in its entirety to your parent, but this is the question they were asking about and here's the answer. And that's just a way of making sure that you're empowered in this conversation and that only the information that you want to share with your parents is being shared, and also that you know the questions that are being asked and kind of understand the context of what the answer is as it's happening. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to contact us and we can definitely talk more. All right, so health. A few things with health. If you haven't had any checkups recently and you might be due for those, medical, dental, eye, it's probably good to do that before you travel. Immunizations, of course, some countries have requirements for that, and we may at some point here start to see requirements for COVID immunizations. At this point, I think the immunization rollouts are a little bit early for those types of requirements, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few months we start to see that or see requirements for immunization passports, which are kind of documentation that's being put together by different countries or in cooperation between different countries. So make sure you're aware if there are any of those types of requirements and that you're following that. Often immunizations do require either a shot and then waiting for a certain number of weeks in order for that to go into effect, or they might have one shot and then a wait and then another shot and then waiting another couple of weeks. So make sure that you are looking into that with enough time to potentially be able to follow through on any immunizations that you might need. And sometimes you will find with visa applications that they may require some sort of health exam. I'll say honestly, for the most part, that's not as common anymore. But you may also run into with COVID a requirement to get a negative COVID test before you travel too, depending on exactly what the policy will be when you'll be traveling. If that is the case, be sure that you understand exactly what the guidelines are for what they need in that. It may be that the test has to be from within the last 72 hours or something like that. One issue I know somebody ran into was with the results needing to include a full name, not just initials. There are certain types of tests that are out there that are specifically for travelers where they will have more detail, where they will run the test a little bit differently. So as you're looking towards your plans to travel, make sure you understand any of those requirements. And then if you need any assistance with finding a place that you might be able to get that type of a test done, please feel free to contact us and we can help with looking for those options too. And then there is information on the Centers for Disease Control website about health situations in different countries. It's broken down by individual country and it'll give you some recommendations about immunizations and things that you might need. The State Department, the US State Department also has some information. In general though, it is best to talk to your doctor or to a travel clinic, such as Cass Community Health has a travel clinic, Sanford has a travel clinic, where they can answer more specific questions about the specific countries that you'd be going to, and they would also be looking at your specific health situation when they would be advising you. So some people might need more immunizations than others, or there might be some people who have specific health concerns where it would not be good to get those types of immunizations and things like that. And talking with a qualified medical professional is the best way to identify that. And then where possible, know yourself. I'll be honest, I don't know my blood type as much as I've traveled, but if you do have that information, it's worthwhile in terms of if something were to come up, being able to give another doctor as much information as you possibly can. Know any medication that you might take, including the generic names, so not just the um, kind of the US specific name for it, know the generic name. Know if you're diabetic or allergic to something or any other medical conditions that you might have. And that's something where you don't have to let us know in our office, but make sure that the program coordinator at the university that you're going to has that information. And the reason for that is that if there were any circumstances that might come up where you needed medical assistance, but you were not conscious, the overseas program coordinator is probably going to be the person that would be contacted to make sure that you're receiving the appropriate care, and them having access to that information to be able to communicate with doctors, hospitals, etc., would be the best if they're able to accurately give out any information that might be needed and to make sure that you receive the care that you would need. And then again, related to carry-ons, if you do have any prescription drugs, be sure that what you would bring would go in your carry-on, so there wouldn't be any possibility of it getting lost somehow. And when I say getting lost, that's not just a euphemism for somebody stealing it. They sometimes, when you have a suitcase that's been checked, they'll open it just to take a look and make sure there's no contraband in the bag. And it's possible for something just to fall out of the bag too. So, things that are outside of your kind of immediate control, they can just kind of disappear when you're traveling. Hopefully not, but you just wouldn't want anything that you really, really needed to be in danger of that happening. If you do have any over-the-counter remedies like ibuprofen or aspirin or something like that, you would want to put those in your carry-on. If you have extra glasses or contacts, those are things that go in your carry-on as well. And then be prepared. If you do have any specific medical conditions and prescriptions, it is worthwhile asking for your doctor to do a letter or to print something out that just describes what those things are and includes that generic name, so that if you did need any sort of medical care, that you'd be able to share that with a local doctor. Any medications that you might bring along, make sure that you keep them in the original container that has your name on it and the prescription information. Do not put them into a different bottle. Even if the original prescription bottle is huge and really annoying to pack, you still have to bring it. Just because if you have, say, little white pills and you put them in a different bottle, the people for customs or police and stuff like that, they can't tell if that's something that you're supposed to have or if that's an illegal drug. And having it in the prescription bottle just makes it really clear that that is what that is. And then the other thing is that if you are taking any prescription medications well before you're planning on traveling, double check and make sure that they are actually going to be legal in the country that you're going to. Especially some of the ADHD medicines like Ritalin and stuff like that. In some countries, they are not legal there. So if you do need to look for any kind of adjustments to your medication or look for any alternative prescriptions that you might need to transition onto, it's important that you know that and start having that conversation with your doctor very early on in the process. And just so you know, even if there are some limitations on various medications, sometimes there are certain amounts that are allowed into a country or a process that you can go through to get permission to bring a certain amount for your personal use, or things that you can work out where you can potentially have your physician contact a local physician to get the prescription transferred over or something like that. But again, all of those kinds of processes require a little bit of preparation. So be sure to check into that soon. If you are having any challenges with finding that information, First, take a look at the embassy for the country that you're going to and see if they have that information on there. And then if you are not able to find it or you're not really understanding what it's saying, please feel free to contact your study abroad advisor and we can do our best to assist. Recognizing that we're not lawyers, but we do have experience with looking at that information and can probably give you some idea of where to go with that once we've found it. All right, so safety and responsibility. I know this sounds like a party, but I do have to talk about it. We'll get through it quick. So the first thing is that there's something called the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, STEP, which is something that's done by the US government. It's something where you go in and you put in the information about yourself and where you are staying and the time that you're going to be there. And the reason for that is that if there are any major emergencies that happen in a particular country, then the US government knows that you're there and they would be able to assist. So as an example, quite a few years ago now, when the Arab Spring stuff was happening, the US government had helped to evacuate people from Cairo when the safety situation was a little bit unknown. When there was an earthquake in Japan, the same thing happened. And so just making sure that the US government knows means that the kind of full force and strength of the US government can be brought to bear to assist you in the case of a major emergency happening. The second thing is that the US State Department does have something called travel advisories. So you can go on their website and they put out information about the safety situation in different countries. Normally, most of the places that people would be going would have a travel advisory that would be in either the exercise normal precautions or the exercised increased caution. Do not be surprised at this point if you see that they're in the reconsider travel, just because a lot of the world right now is in reconsider travel because of COVID. But it does break down in more detail all of kind of the other types of safety issues that you might run into. So if there are any issues with pickpockets in that country, or if you're in some place where maybe you have to watch out for certain types of taxis to make sure you're as safe as possible or something like that, they have that information on there. So I really encourage you to go out and read their information on the country that you're going to, and then just kind of take to heart the tips and tricks and recommendations that they have in there for that. And then also as a heads up, later on in April, we will be putting together a little release form for you that will also have some information and the links to the travel advisory pieces so that you can go in and make sure that you have the most current information about travel safety for the place that you're going. And then you'll just sign off that you're aware of the kind of current travel risks and that you are choosing to study abroad at this point, knowing that information. Another thing that might happen when you're traveling is losing your passport. Honestly, this is one of the more annoying things to lose. So if you can at all help it, I recommend don't lose your passport. Um, Ways to not lose your passport include making sure to keep it someplace safe, inside coat pocket, in an inner kind of spot in your bag, and then keeping your bag really safe and close to yourself. Don't put your passport in your back pocket. It's really easy for pickpockets to take that. Don't put it in the outer pocket of a bag or something like that. When you're traveling, don't put your passport on the shelf in a bathroom stall. Don't put it in the pocket in the seat back in front of you on the plane. Just don't put it places, even if it just seems like it's going to be, just for a second, just because when you're traveling, you're often tired and you have a lot of stuff that's going on. And it's just really, really easy to forget something and to leave it in a place and then to realize 10 minutes later after you're off the plane that, shoot, this thing that was so important was there. Also, if you do happen to lose your passport, this is where it's really, really helpful to have that photocopy of your passport. You can have that copy either something that you have in your suitcase or you can put it in, some sort of online service to save it where you might have access to it, or you can email it to yourself. On your passport, the big pieces of sensitive information are your name and your birth date. The passport number itself, I mean, don't give it to everybody, but it's not it's not a sensitive number in quite the same way as like a social security number. You know, so keep it private, but don't stress over it in quite the same way as you would like your social security card. Um, and having access to it is really important if you do need to replace your passport, just because that is a proof of citizenship and that really speeds up that process for you. If you do, again, if you do lose your passport, it's 3 steps. The first is that you do have to file a police report with the local police in the country that you're at. So depending on where you are and how easy it is, and if there's a language barrier or something like that, that could be a whole day or a whole afternoon process. And then once you've done that, then you have to go to a US embassy or consulate and go through their process to replace the passport. They usually issue the replacement passport as kind of limited validity, meaning that it might be good for 6 months. And usually that costs somewhere around $200 to do that replacement passport. And then after you've done the replacement passport, then you also have to go through our process to replace the visa in it, depending on what the process is for the country that you're in. So you potentially, if you lose a passport, you end up spending like 3 days getting everything resolved and kind of put back together for that. So best thing, just don't lose your passport, and then you will save yourself a headache. In terms of transportation, there are a few things. The first thing, driving. Yeah, I mean, you might be able to. I don't know that I really recommend it though. The it's tell a little story. When I first started working at, actually when I was at Concordia College, the very first like couple of months where I was working there, I had a student who had contacted me because about I think it was like maybe 9 or 10 months previous, he had gone to Florence with a short-term program, and he had rented a vehicle when he was there and had driven for a little bit during a free day that they had, and then months and months and months later, he had received some sort of letter saying that he owed the city of Florence the equivalent of $500 in traffic tickets. And he was just wondering if that was really a thing. And so I had ended up contacting a travel provider that we worked with in Florence. And she had explained to me that in the center of the city of Florence, a lot of the streets are not ones that you can drive on normally. They're reserved for pedestrians. And apparently, what the city has done is they actually put security cameras up on all of the buildings. So if you happen to turn off of a street that you're allowed to drive on onto a street you're not allowed to drive on, then the cameras will catch a picture of the vehicle on all 3 sides of the building that you're going around in order to get back onto the road that you can drive on. And then they will ticket you for all of those. And so it had taken that long for the traffic tickets to come through because the city had to track down the rental agency and then they had to track down the student's address information back in the US. But unfortunately, they were legitimate tickets that the student had. And so I had to say, yes, you do technically have to pay those, especially if you are ever planning on going back to Europe again. So the challenging thing about driving is that even if you are eligible to do it, you are still subject to whatever the local driving regulations are, and it may be difficult to recognize where those are different from what you're used to in the US. You may also be driving on a different side of the road or just have really different expectations for the way that drivers behave. The signs might all be in a foreign language, but you'd still be expected to follow the instructions that the signs are giving you. So yeah, in general, I don't necessarily recommend driving just because there is kind of a bit of a Pandora's box that you can open on that. Um, that said, being abroad is a really great opportunity to try out different forms of transportation that you maybe aren't used to here in the US, especially mass transportation, so metros and trains and things like that. And I love them. They're fantastic. The thing that I really love about trains is that generally, when you get on them, they're on rails, so you usually know where they're going. For a metro system in a city, oftentimes, if you're still trying to figure out exactly how it works or, you know, figuring out where you need to be, if you happen to miss your stop, you can usually just get off at the next stop and get on the train going the other direction. And it's just really very friendly in terms of being able to make mistakes and kind of roll with it and learn as you're learning about the city. And buses, of course, though those are a little bit more um, unexpected sometimes and where they might be traveling to. So if you get on the wrong bus, it can be a little bit more difficult to make sure that you're getting back to the place that you were. Also things like being on planes. If you're not normally traveling on planes in the US, that can be a new kind of exciting adventure as well. One other thing to watch out for, there's a little picture up there that says look right. That's actually something that they put on the roads in London, specifically because a lot of the tourists that would travel there didn't remember to look in the opposite direction because the traffic is on the opposite side. So if you are in a country where people drive on the opposite side of the road, especially when you first arrive, be really deliberate about thinking about looking in both directions. That's usually the safest way to make sure that you look and catch the correct direction. And you'll get used to it eventually. And then one other thing too, if you are on buses or in a car or something like that in a country where the roads are a lot more narrow than the US, you may find it a little bit nerve-wracking to see how close the vehicles are to each other as they're traveling, or you might find that they drive really fast on curvy roads and things like that. In the US in general, we have really wide roads as compared to a lot of the world. And so it's very natural, it's very normal. Just watch kind of what the local passengers are thinking or doing, and you'll probably see that they're completely checked out and that it's completely normal, even if it seems a little bit nerve-wracking for you. And I'm sure over time you'll get used to it if there are any differences like that. In terms of personal safety, just a couple of tips. The first is that you want to make sure, of course, to look out for your friends when you are there. Watch out for each other, just watch each other's backs. If something doesn't seem right, you know, you have a whole lifetime of experience built up. Trust your gut instincts on that. You know, don't ever feel obligated if somebody wants to be your friend to be friends with them. I know that sometimes when we go into a new situation, we really want to be open-minded and we want to have these opportunities to get to know people. But if you have somebody who's maybe a local who's being really pushy or really wants you to go someplace with them or something like that, and it just doesn't quite seem very comfortable for you, please feel free to say no. You do not have to do anything that you do not feel comfortable with anyone. That is not an obligation that you have. Trust your instincts with that stuff. Let people earn your trust. Again, sometimes, especially when people first arrive abroad, it can be a little hard to kind of tell what the underlying motivations are of other people. It is great to get to know people and to kind of take advantage of that opportunity to meet new people and make new friends and things like that. But you know, don't feel like it has to be an immediate thing, you know, and feel free again to say no or to bow out of things that just don't seem right or you don't feel comfortable about them. And then also be aware of your surroundings. To be honest, 99.9% of the safety things that happen to people, the injuries, are really boring stuff, like tripping on the stairs or maybe having a little bit too much to drink and tripping on a curb or riding a bicycle and running into something that's you know, an unexpected bump in the road or something like that. You know, so all of these safety tips said, just be aware that it's going to mostly be the same exact normal stuff that you would have here that you're already very well prepared for. So just be aware of things like how much you're drinking and like situational awareness kind of things, you know, and obvious stuff like if somebody says, hey, let's take a shortcut down this dark, scary alleyway, and you look down it and you go, oh, I don't really feel comfortable going down the dark, scary alleyway. Let's take the street where all of the lights are and all of the people are. That's probably a good idea. You know, just use your experience, use your awareness, and you will have a great time. And then if you do happen to run into anything that is an emergency, kind of the four different areas of people that are there to assist. First is going to be your program director abroad, their international office, resident director, whatever they call them. But basically the me on the other side of the ocean. That person is there to make sure that you're safe and that you're having as good of an experience as possible. The reason why they're number one on this list is just because they're physically present. So if you need to go to a doctor or a hospital or a police department or something like that, they're physically there. So they can help you get there. They can help with translation stuff as needed. They can make sure that you're getting in contact with the right people. Second, please contact our office. Obviously we're not physically there, but we do have connections, and we can definitely help coordinate things and answer questions, and assist with any situation that might be coming up. Number three, of course, your family. One thing just to be aware of though with your family is that they are going to be somewhat limited in what they can physically do to help you. So just be aware that if you let them know that you have some sort of circumstance that's happening, that you should keep them up to date on what's going on and let them know as things develop over time. As an example, if you happen to be out and about one night, you're going to go meet up with some friends, you get lost, you don't know exactly where you are, and you call your family and say, I'm lost, I don't know where I am. And then you hang up with your family, and then 2 minutes later, you run into your friends and you have a wonderful night. That whole time, your family thinks that their poor loved child is lost in a dark alleyway somewhere, and they're panicking. So, if you called them, be sure to call them back when you find your friends and let them know that you're now safe and happy and everything's good to go, or message them or whatever you need to do. But just make sure to keep them updated once you've told them that you have any kind of circumstances that are happening. And then lastly, the American Embassy, if you're a US citizen, is there to help you as well. One thing I do have to say is that they cannot get you out of prison, but they can come visit you in prison. They can also connect you with lawyers and translators and things like that. And they are just in general a source of support for Americans who are abroad who might be having challenging emergency situations happening. There is a card that we will, it's not there yet, but I will be setting them out in the study abroad office for you to be able to stop in and pick up. It's called the Emergency Action Plan, where on one side it has this information and you can kind of see a little preview of the card itself. And then on the other side, it has what's called the Emergency Action Plan. The first step of the Emergency Action Plan is remain calm. And then it has a second step that is just get yourself to safety. So for example, if you were in a building that was on fire, it would be get out of the burning building. And then it has information on there as well, with the contact information for various people in our office and things like that. And then the other thing that's on it is that it has fields for you to fill in for contact information for people that you might need to reach out to locally or internationally. It also has fields for you to put in things like the insurance that you're covered under, and things like that, your passport number, some of those pieces of information. And it's really helpful just to carry that around as kind of an analog paper thing in your wallet, so that if you ever did have something and your phone died, you would have a backup of that information. So again, I'll let you know, I'll send out an email when the cards are available for you to pick up. We'll also have some t-shirts and little stuff bison and stuff like that that'll be available for you to pick up at the same time when you get the card. Another thing, just as a heads up, a preview, during the third pre-departure session, I'm going to talk about the Alert Traveler app that you can download and log into. Currently, I don't think it's active for people to be able to download it. So if you do get a notice in our system, just know we'll be getting you set up with that down the road in the next couple of weeks. And then last little pep talk, I do just have to remind you that you are still covered under the NDSU Code of Student Behavior. I know you guys are all fantastic. I don't expect there to be any issues, but if there were something that you happen to do abroad that violated the Student Code of Conduct, potentially what would happen is that the program might have some sort of consequences for you. And if they let me know about that happening, then unfortunately I do have to let Student Life know about it here, and then potentially you would have to go through whatever applicable consequences would be here at NDSU when you returned as well, which would be a pretty big bummer. So just don't do that. In general, drugs, don't do it. And I don't say that because I'm afraid of drugs or, I'm just like super square. It's just there's a lot of kind of complicated legal guidelines around drugs in some places. And even if it seems like it's pretty straightforward, it may not be. As an example, This was not NDSU students. This was a story about something that I heard at a different university. But it was a case where there were a group of students that happened to be in Belgium, and they had a free day, and some of them went to Amsterdam and had gone to a cafe there and had some pot, and then returned back to Belgium. And one of them had a negative reaction to the marijuana that they had used, and ended up having to go to the emergency room. And it turned out that in Belgium, legally speaking, having marijuana in the bloodstream was actually considered to be importing marijuana to the country. And luckily the program leader, this student had violated the terms of the program. The program leader put them on a plane back to the US right away. And I say fortunately because the police actually showed up not very long after, because the hospital had to report them to the police. And so they narrowly avoided ending up being arrested for that. So even though they did it in a country where it was legal, they went back to a country where it was not legal, and potentially had consequences for that. So, we have places in the US where you can go and do some of this stuff where it's legal and you don't have to worry about that. So I just really recommend avoiding potential legal issues in a foreign country wherever possible. In terms of sexual behavior, just be responsible. The CDC does have information about different concerns and special things that might relate in specific countries, so be sure to review that if applicable. In terms of alcohol, just be safe. Know whether you're legal or not to be drinking in the country that you will be studying. Know yourself. Different people are going to have different drinking tolerances, and may be able to drink more or less depending, and still be able to act responsibly. Also recognize, honestly, sometimes international study abroad students can go a little bit overboard. So maybe keep an eye on the way that the locals approach alcohol, because that might be a little bit more reasonable, but you can still have, a pretty enjoyable time following kind of their lead for that. Some of the warning signs, if you do happen to realize that you're missing classes or your grades are going down, or maybe you end up being hungover from something, and so you're missing out on cultural opportunities. Like, I was going to go see this amazing site or travel with some people, but I'm feeling hungover and now I can't. Or if you're spending all your money on alcohol, or if you find yourself in any sort of unsafe situations or having blackouts or something like that, definitely dial it back. Just keep an eye out for that stuff, and moderate any alcohol that you might be drinking at that point. And then lastly, you are a representative of your hometown of Fargo, the Midwest, the US, and NDSU. Just be aware that you will probably talk to more than one person, where this is the first person from the US or from our area that you have ever talked to. And so they are going to see you as kind of the representative of who people are from our area. And in general, people live there. So just be aware that you're a representative, you're an ambassador, you're somebody who's going to be a responsible member of that community. And if there are things that you wouldn't do back here in the US, be sure not to do them there. Just be respectful of the people that are there, and of the community that you're in. And have a great time, make friends, enjoy yourself. Have a wonderful time in the other country. Okay, next steps. Just a couple of things that you may want to be doing. One, look into information about the local country. Look for any cultural differences that they might have, just so you kind of know what to expect. If you are going to a country where English is not the first language, even if you don't speak the foreign language, it can be really helpful to look up information on questions like where's the bathroom, and thank you, and please, and things like that. I've definitely had times when I've been traveling where I'm in a country where I don't speak that local language, but just having the ability to say thank you made such a huge difference, where you could really tell that people appreciated you making the effort. And so looking up some of those things before you travel, when you get there, you'll really appreciate having the ability just to communicate those types of simple pieces of information. Also, look into, if you have to make any considerations about whether you can drink the water or any expectations about the type of food. If drinking water is a thing, also one heads up, well, two heads up, I guess. Number one, be aware of the ice that might be in any sort of beverages. And two, brushing your teeth. That was the one that always tripped me up. If you are in a place where you can't drink the water, you have to use bottled water for brushing your teeth as well. But usually in those places, you're just buying bottled water or drinking cans of soda or something like that, where it's a prepackaged kind of thing. I guess the other thing with drinking water is if you have any sort of fruits or vegetables, if they've been washed in that local water, you usually want to eat them cooked then instead of eating them raw. But just being aware of those types of things, and you can kind of plan for that. Local transportation, get an idea of the way that people travel in the local circumstances, and then look into the place that you're going, what to expect about the types of housing you'll have. Do they have cafeterias or little cafes on campus or near campus? How do they do the internet? What's their library like? Those types of things can be really kind of helpful and fun in terms of looking ahead to the time that you're going to have. Also, we do have information on our website about different kind of diversity resources. If you do have any questions, please know that we are Safe Zone allies, for assisting with any LGBTQA types of questions or any of the other groups. Please feel free to contact us and, excuse me, and we can help. And then also some other things, there's a couple of books that are listed on there that might be of interest if you want to take a look at those out there. There's information that's in your application that comes up after you've been accepted. And also we have the travel planning resources. One other recommendation that can be helpful too is you can go out and Google students who have studied in the location that you're going to, and sometimes they'll talk about different things that they did or things that they thought were particularly interesting or exciting to do. And that can give you some idea of things that you might be interested in doing while you're traveling. They also sometimes tell funny stories about kind of cultural differences that they ran into and stuff like that. And that can be kind of a neat way to prepare for your traveling as well. And then just a reminder, again, I'll send this out in the email again, but I do have, there are 2 more pre-departure sessions that'll be coming up. Number 2.5 that I added this semester is going to be on journaling, identity, storytelling, and a little bit on professional development. That one I am not going to record because we are going to be having some discussion during that, and I don't want people to feel like they have to perform or kind of hide their honest answers or something like that because other people will be watching it. But I will send out a handout that I have on professional development and some stuff like that after it. But if you're able to join us, I think it'll be kind of a fun time and an enjoyable conversation that we'll be having. And then the other thing is the pre-departure session number 3 is the one where I invite returnee students based on the locations that people will be going to, and we'll have a chance to have some conversation with that as well. I am going to talk about culture shock, a little bit more about identity pieces in there, about Alert Traveler, and then most of it is actually just going to be open for conversation. As you can see the time frame on that, it's a Wednesday, not a Tuesday. It's also from 3 to 5:30, but I'm just going to talk for about the first hour, and then the rest of it is just going to be open for people to chat with each other if they want to. And I will reach out to people over email just to double check if this date and time still works. You probably RSVP'd yes or no in your application with us already, but I'll just reach out to you just to make sure that either your yes still applies or your no still applies, and I'll ask that you respond by Friday, April 9th so that I have time to invite returnees for the people that will actually be at the session. And then if you do have a letter to yourself that you have written, please feel free to drop that off in Study Abroad Services in the Memorial Union. A letter to yourself, just as a reminder, is just a letter that's sealed in an envelope, and you can put anything on there. It can be kind of fun to talk about things that you're looking for, things that you're excited about, things that you think might be surprising or that you're afraid of or something like that. Just anything that you might think is going to be interesting down the road after you have returned, and then we'll get that letter back to you. We won't read it. It'll only be for you. When you drop off the letter, please be sure to put your name and then write letter to self on there. That's just to make sure that I know not to open the envelope. And then I'll hold on to it and we will get it back to you after. All right, so that is the second pre-departure session. I'm finishing right on time today. If you do have any questions about this, please feel free to contact your study abroad advisor. And I look forward to seeing you at our future pre-departure sessions.